Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 73. With Yontif, I should say. Tonight is Yud Beis Tammuz, the Chag HaGeula of the Frierdiker Rebbe in the year Tov Reish Pei Zayin. So we're talking about almost 90 years ago, 88 years to be exact. And obviously, it needs to be the central focus of our discussion. Chassidus Applied. So the obvious question can be asked, why is it relevant to us? We're now in the year Tavshin Ayin Hey. That happened in 1927. We're in the year 2015. Why is it relevant to us today, the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe? It was different times. It was difficult times. It was Russia in the worst times, the Soviet Union, with the Gzeiros, the decrees, and the oppression against everything that was Jewish and Yiddishkeit and Torah. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, who stood at the forefront of those activities, was targeted by the communists, especially the Yevsektia, the Jewish communists. And he was redeemed. Great miracle. We should remember it. Fundamental to Chassidus, fundamental to Torah. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Loi Eisi Belvad Gal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not me alone, God redeemed, but all Eden. All those that spread Torah and all Jews, even those that are B'Shem Yisrael Yechuna, meaning that on a revealed level, all they have is a nickname called being Jew. But what is the relevance to our lives today? It's different times, different situation. And besides the commemoration, how do we learn from it lessons in our personal lives? So I want to share a few thoughts about this, taken cold from different sikhs of the Rebbe over the years, asking specifically this question, and the different approaches that Rebbe took. Obviously, with a limited time, we have to sum it up. But let's start with something l'chvevusa de milsa, something special, something maybe unique and even new. I have been discussing the recording that we played 2 weeks ago on episode 3071, where you hear the Rebbe, the Rabbi Chadikov, and the Rebbe seemingly in conversation or not conversation about, and the Rabbi Chadikov reading a sikha from Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Ches. I mentioned last week, further research shows that this same recording, whether it's related or not, has in it a farbrengen of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is hard to make out, but I've been working painstakingly trying to discern words, and I'm ready to say, for the first time, that I believe is the sikha of Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Tes, which would make it the last farbrengen that the Frierdiker Rebbe farbrengt, Chaim Chayusi Baal Medain, Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Tes, printed in Sefer HaSichos Tov Tes. Different words that I'm still working on trying to figure out all the words, but I noticed there, what really got me was where it says there on page 334 in this sikha Tov Tes, Yud Beis Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Melen Chassidus aber men davet nit. And you could hear those words as well as many other words. So I will keep you posted more information, but if it indeed is the sikh of Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Tes, it would be, as I said, the last farbrengen to Yud Beis Tammuz. But interestingly is that the recording has more than what we see here in the printed version, because the printed version was the Shemesh Hashemim, which means that they heard it and they wrote down what they heard, which may or may not be complete, even though the Rebbe edited it and so on. It's a very fascinating sikha and definitely worthwhile reading, especially the Rebbe made a big fuss that the last sikhas of the Frierdiker Rebbe are having it all kinds of hints to the future. And this sikha talks many interesting things about that's relevant to all of us. But I wanted to point that out because as this mystery continues to unfold of that sikha, if it indeed is Yud Beis Tammuz, it would be quite historical find. And though the recording has been around, but I don't believe it's ever been identified as which sikh it is. So that's connected to one thing, Yud Beis Tammuz. The second thing I'd like to share, before we get back to the question, is something also which many of you may not be aware of. In Tov Lamed Zayin, which was 50th anniversary of Yud Beis Tammuz, 1977, my father, Olav Shalom, who was the publisher and editor of the Allgemeiner Journal, wanted to make a special beilage, a special supplement in the Allgemeiner for the 50th anniversary of the Geula. And of course, he wrote to the Rebbe encouraged him, and my father said to the Rebbe, in honor of the 50th year, maybe the Rebbe would honor us with sharing some details that have not been revealed to this point. So the Rebbe smiled and said to my father that he should first go to other players, so to speak, other people who are around, and let them fill in, and whatever is missing, he'll fill in perhaps a few other details. The Rebbe mentioned a few people that were still there, of course. The Rebbe referred to Musia, which is the Rebbetzin's name, Chaim Mushke, the Rebbe referred to as Musia. And my father made appointments with her and her sister and some others who were around and found out very fascinating things. One of the things that was not known until that point is that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, who were not married yet, but they were dating, and they were miyuid, liyas chesnei, meaning it was already confirmed that he would be marrying the Frierdiker Rebbe's second daughter, which would take place later, Yudal Kislev Tafresh Peites, after the Frierdiker Rebbe would come out from prison and after he would come out from Russia. That would happen in Varsha in Warsaw. So they were, that night, when they came to arrest the Frierdiker Rebbe, which was on Tesvav Sivan, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin told the story to my father, and then the Rebbe later confirmed it. They were taking a walk. They were walking, the Rebbetzin said they were walking on a bridge in the area, and when they came home, the Rebbetzin went inside, and the Rebbe was waiting for her outside until she would say that, good night. Suddenly the Rebbe sees that the Rebbetzin is looking out from the second floor. She went up to the window, and she yells down to the Rebbe, "Wir haben guest." We have guests, which was immediately the Rebbe understood what that meant. It means unwanted guests. And he immediately ran to Chaim Lieberman and to others who were involved in the secret activities of the Frierdiker Rebbe and let them know, and they began to prepare the destroying documents, other things that needed to be done just in case of the sakana. And that was the night that the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested. So that was one detail. My father later went back to the Rebbe and shared that with him, and he says, yes, exactly what happened. He remembers, and he remembers running to the secretary of the Frierdiker Rebbe and doing what they had to do. There were more details that were published then in 1977. I just wanted to share because it's always, people love a var chidush, something new. There are many more details, also pictures and documents that were never published before were printed in that special supplement in the Allgemeine Journal. Now back to Yud Beis Tammuz itself. So there are many sikhs to address. I want to quote a few key ones. Number one, going backwards, so to speak, Tov Shemem Ches, Shabbos Parsha Chukas, which was Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe spoke in a very powerful way about Yud Beis Tammuz, explaining Taka, why is it the Geula for every Jew on earth? You could say that everyone should celebrate it, but how is it a Geula that everybody was redeemed? And the Rebbe explains in the Chukas Tov Shemem Ches, in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shemem Ches, which I was zeicher to prepare. It's a very profound sikha, that because the Geula revealed the Nekudas Hayad, there's the spark of Yiddishkeit in every human being, in every Jew on earth. And being that it was the last Geula in Chassidus Chabad, so to speak, and right before the Geulas Hamitis Vashlema, so it has a centrality that other Geulas do not have, and primarily in revealing the Elokus, the Pinteleid in every person. And when do you see that? You see that in times of pressure, when there's a Gzeira. Till then, you didn't have it with Gali. The Frierdiker Rebbe had to be Moiser Nefesh, because his whole life was on the line. Mesiris Nefesh, as the Rebbe says it there, and also in a fascinating Sikh, Yud Beis Tammuz Tovshin Chov Zayin, that would be 1967, explains what the Chiddush is, because if, God forbid, had the Frierdiker Rebbe lost his life due to the arrest, Chassidus Chabad would have come to a halt. The Rebbe says that in Tovshin Chov Zayin. Because the Rebbe clearly was not yet in a position, he wasn't even married yet to the Rebbetzin. A position as a Rebbe, of course he could have been, but he was not in a place where anybody would even have looked at to him. And the Rebbe doesn't say that, I'm explaining. So clearly the whole Shalshalos of Chassidus would have come to an end in the most horrible fashion. On a very simple level. Because their Gzeira, their decree, their oppression, wasn't just on an individual. It was on the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the whole Nesias Chabad was on the line, the whole Tenuah of Chabad, the whole movement, and not just Chabad as Chassidus Chabad, but spreading of Teira and mitzvahs, Harbotzos HaTeira. That's why the Frierdiker Rebbe makes it such a big statement, because what happened was it wasn't a victory of an individual, or even of one Tenuah, of one movement. It was a victory to show that in the harshest, darkest moment, where perhaps was never darker, that Teira and Chassidus prevailed. And Frierdiker Rebbe miraculously was saved, and ultimately miraculously left Russia. And the movement continued, first in Europe, and then finally coming to America and thriving as it does today. So this isn't just an event that happened then. It's an event that's happening now. Because that was a demonstration of the nitzchis, of the eternity, of the power of Torah and mitzvahs and of chassidus. So that's one thing. Look at those sichos and you'll see more elaborate detail. But taking it even further, what's the lesson to us? Okay, we understand now its significance, importance, but now we're no longer in a time of Gezerah. We're no longer in a time of decrees. So there's a fascinating sikha from the Rebbe, Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Lamed Beis, 1972, where he addresses this in a very interesting way. He refers firstly to a sikha that was said 30 years earlier, which would be Tov Shin Beis, 1942. Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Shin Beis, in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shin Beis, volume Tov Shin Beis, page 153. And the Frierdiker Rebbe begins there that says 15 years ago, Hashem Yisborach Alein, Mekadosh Hashem given. God Himself sanctified God's name with the Geula, because Tov Shin Beis was 15 years from Tov Reish Pei Zayin. And he goes on to say how the last year, his birthday, the last birthday of the Frierdiker Rebbe in the Rebbe Rashab's lifetime, which would be Yud Beis Tammuz Ateres, Tov Reish Ayin Tes. So we're talking about 1919. He says, my father celebrated me the birthday, and as always he said a mimer for me, and the mimer he said was connected to Mesiras Nefesh. Frierdiker Rebbe goes even stronger and says that man hat eigentlich gedacht sagen the mimer yes. We should have actually repeated that mimer now, but because of certain reasons he can't do that, so he'll give it out in writing. But the mimer of that Yud Beis Tammuz Ateres, the Frierdiker Rebbe, referring to it, he spoke about Mesiras Nefesh, and then the Rebbe Rashab, which is the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, spoke a lot to him in that period of time, which should have been the last months before his Stalkus Beis Nissen, talks about the power, that the need for Mesiras Nefesh B'Poel for Torah mitzvahs, which unfortunately was a prophecy that would be fulfilled in the literal sense of the word. That we have the famous line from the Rebbe Rashab that the Nesiyas of the Frierdiker Rebbe should be b'chesed u'berachamim. It should all go with compassion and with kindness because of the great challenges. And it's hard to imagine for us Americans, for people born in freedom, what kind of pressures that existed then. We hear the stories and so on, but it was a different reality. You were talking about sakonas nefashos b'poel mamish, where literally every second was a danger. Not just to the Rebbe, but to all the Jews and to everyone in that situation. You're talking about millions and millions of Jews. So you have to understand and put yourself in that position, and you realize what the gravity of the situation was. And the Frierdiker Rebbe then continues and speaks about this Mesiras Nefesh. He says, "Nach the Stalkus, after the Rebbe Rashab Taka passed away, hat sich angehim gzeres of Torah and Chadorim, started decrees against Torah and schools and so on." And here he writes, and this is what the Rebbe refers to 30 years later in Tov Shin Lamed Beis. And it's important to have the link, the historical link, because it's all connected. The 15 years, 30 years after, basically 45 years from Yud Beis Tammuz. And he says like this, Tov Reish Pei Beis. So we're now talking about 1922. Seinen sich zusammengekommen in Moskva 9 Tmimim. In Moscow gathered 9 students from Temchet Mimim. Talmidei Temchet Mimim, students of the yeshiva. Und ich bin gewähnt der Center, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I was the 10th. I'm really reading it literally because of its significance and import. Und wir haben alle geschworen, Meister Nefer sein sich, and we all swore to give our lives if Torah atipas dam achren, for Torah to the last drop of blood. So the exact lashon here. Wir haben dann zu Teil der Arbeit in der Medina. We then divided the work in the Medina, meaning in Russia, in the former Soviet Union. For jeden Bazunder, everyone had their particular role. Und das hat gehabt a große Ashpa of the Medina. This had a great influence on the country. Und seien gegründet geworden, they were established. Hunderte Talmud Torahs and Chadorim, hundreds of Talmud Torahs and Chadorim and schools. You could say your early schooling, Chadorim. Nicht wie da in America. Was a Talmud Torah is not Isler machen a broche of the Torah or the Zogen Kaddish. Not takef lernen. Okay, he says not just a Talmud Torah in America, as I guess at the time was only to make a bracha, how to learn how to make a blessing or to say Kaddish, but taka to learn. And then he continues about the Yevsextia and how it finally led to his arrest and so on. The Rebbe in Tov Shin Lamed Beis refers to this. He says 15 years ago, my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, said this. He said, what's the lesson to us? We're not in a situation like this. There's no need for Krisis Bris, for a covenant, atipa to the blast. We live in freedom. What's the lesson for us? And a powerful, powerful sikha. which you can say captures the essence of the Rebbe's Nesius and leadership. The Rebbe establishes the direct lesson that today too we have a war to fight. It's a different war. It's not with the Yevsekti, it's not with communists. It's the war with apathy, is the war with ignorance and assimilation. So yes, indeed, in 1945, World War II ended. And the wars in Europe, and in many ways, the wars in the Soviet Union continued on with the Jewish Yiddishkeit. But in 1950, when the Rebbe assumed leadership, he declared World War III, you can say. These are my words. The war against apathy. And the Rebbe makes it clear in that Sikha that each of us has to do exactly the same thing. If the Frierdiker Rebbe told us about this story, it's a lesson for us today that we have to have today Mesidus Harotzen, the Rebbe says. It brings from Teire Eir in Miketz and says Mesidus HaNefesh can be nefesh, literally giving your life in a situation of danger. But the nefesh also comes from the word rotzen, to give in total dedication of your will, of your desire, of your total commitment to the cause, based on the Kut and Teire Eir Miketz. And the Rebbe goes on to say that's what is necessary today, Mesidus HaNefesh, and Mesidus HaRotzen, total dedication. And he goes on, not just in general, but to gather other 9 people and make a minyan and influence other 9 people to have such a commitment, exactly as the Frierdiker Rebbe did then. So mi Yidma, even though we can't compare ourselves to that type of Mesidus Nefesh, but everything is a lesson. It would not have been told to us if it's not necessary for us to do. So he takes Mamash and Mesidus Nefesh story that you could think is completely a story of the past, no relevant, and makes it completely relevant and necessary today. Besides sharing it in general, there's also a personal reason I'm sharing it, because my grandfather, my namesake, was one of these 9 Tmimim. His yahrzeit is Beis Tammuz, just for the record. And it's a long story how his involvement, most of them were killed because they were arrested and then shot. My grandfather ended up in Siberia, ended up coming out of there. And it's a long story, not for right now, about his own evolution and how he ended up continuing the shlichus even afterwards. But the point is, what is that we know from this is dedication. It just takes on different shape and form. Then was required, unfortunately, tragically, real life and death. Today, it requires a complete battle with our own apathy and our own complacency and our own gleichgültigkeit in Yiddish, or in Hebrew, adishut. So I saw a yechidus, which I thought fits very well, and this, as I said, captures the Rebbe's Nesiya so powerfully. It's a yechidus echad manash, 22nd of Tammuz, Tovshin Chov Daled. So that would be around this period in time, in the year 1964. And this is the language. Eden zayn adurach alle nisein, as the Rebbe says. Jews went through all tests. Nisoyin von Tzad, the test of pain, von Golus, obviously, von Znus, sexuality, inappropriate sexuality, von Anias, poverty, uke'esu nisoyin the Freiheit. Now the test is one of freedom. Listen to these words now. Hashem Yisbarach Emer, the Eberste sagt, Nat eich Freiheit, und los mir zen, so eich felt Mashiach. Here is freedom, God is saying to us. And let us see if you're missing Mashiach. Niet de Eden von Russland, and niet de Eden von Morocco yaviu Mashiach. Not the Jews of Russia, and not the Jews of Morocco will bring Mashiach. Not the Eden von Artsas Sabris, the American Jews, and from Australia, similarly, Shasham Chaim Chaya Chefesh, where they live free lives, v'chulu. Das ist der letzte Nisayon of to bring a Mashiach. This is the last test to bring Mashiach. Umeniz to say letzad ha'hepech. The Rebbe concludes, and is being used the opposite way. In other words, to become more lax, to become more comfortable, to become less urgent. In many ways, this captures the essence of the whole Nesius of the Rebbe. Till the Rebbe, 6 generations, starting from the Alter Rebbe of Chassidus Chabad, all lived under the gun, whether it was under the Tsar, under one form of oppression, pogroms, whatever it was. All the 6 generations. Each in their own way. The Rebbe Rashab, the pogroms in Kishinev and other things in those years, and Tofrei Samach Vov and other years that were horrible years. The Rebbe Marash, of course, the Samach Tzedek, the Kantonisten. I mean, the list goes on. The Rebbe is the first Rebbe that became a Rebbe in freedom. 1950, America was free. Jews had freedom, free rights to practice their religion. In Bacheri Mosach HaBarzel, behind the Iron Curtain, the Jews were still in prison, as the Rebbe would every major Farbrengen talk about, until they finally were freed. And in 1990, as the Rebbe made such a big issue of the crumbling of the Soviet Union. But in America it was free, and the Jews were finding freedom. But the Rebbe launched, as I said, another war, the war against apathy. What's needed now is a same Mesiras Nefesh as then, and in many ways it's much harder. Because then the enemy defined the terms. There was no choice, whether you liked it or not. You were fighting for your survival. And it was life and death. Today, you can convince yourself that I'm comfortable. Everything is fine. And the Rebbe made it a statement. And I'm submitting this as my own speculation. All the Rabbeim went was called on dacha. Dacha was a vacation. Kavyochel. What means vacation for the Rabbeim? They were mevar and netzutzes, the redeeming sparks in different places in Europe or outside of Lubavitch or where it was. The Rebbe didn't do that. Why? Not talking on, none of the Rabbeim went to comfort, for comfort reasons or relaxing. It was the Seder. That was the new Birer. I would submit that the reason was the Rebbe went on war against any form of leisure and any form of comforts and just, we're going to relax. God forbid, am I saying anything that is not a blessing? Freedom, comfort. Of course it's a blessing. But the challenge that we suddenly lose our sense of urgency and something compelling is very profound, as the Rebbe says in the Sichidus. So this is the lesson of Yud Beis Tammuz today. Mesiras Nefesh of Frierdiker Rebbe then was with real enemies in that fashion. Today it's with different type of enemies, starting from within right here, in our hearts and souls. Our own apathy, our own comfort zones. Especially coming into the summer, which we'll soon discuss, how appropriate it is to address. So Yud Beis Tammuz has a tremendous lesson for all of us. If you're any moment apathetic, basically just remind yourself of the prices paid and the lessons learned and how that's relevant today. I just want to add one more story that I heard talking about Beis Nissen and the Stalkus of and the Frierdiker Rebbe was being prepared for his Mesiras Nefesh. Rab Shmuel Levittin was once in the Zal. He was the Mashpia in Temchet Mim here in 770, earlier in different places, different yeshivas. And the Frierdiker Rebbe once summoned them up. I think may have been the Blas Beis Nissen Tovshin Tes. And there was the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rashab. The Frierdiker Rebbe said to him these words. He came back down and shared. He said, "The Tate geht hecher und hecher. Und es fällt ein junger Mann, wo so schreien, Ai, Rebbe." My father's going higher and higher, meaning the neshama is ascending from year to year. And we're missing a younger man, a young person, to yell out and scream, Ai, Rebbe. Reminds me when I heard it with a sikha from the Rebbe in the later years, the Mems, I forgot now which one it is, where the Rebbe talks about the Chofetz Chaim, that they went, a group of Jews went to challenge a certain Gzeira decree that the Russian government is imposing on Jews. And they were not successful with all their arguments and trying to persuade. So the Chofetz Chaim asked them, the Rebbe shares the story and says, he had tinus them, did anyone faint? That it disturbed you so much that anyone faint? And the Rebbe yelled out, did anyone faint? This is when it's Negei ben Nefesh, Chassidus, Yiddishkeit, the Rebbe's in Yonim. This is Mesiras HaRatzon. It's emetzad gechalisht. And I speak to myself just as I speak to you. Yud Beis Tammuz is right here this evening, tomorrow. Yud Gimel Tammuz, the continuation of it. We all know it's a continuation of Gimel Tammuz, which at the time was like what the Rebbe would call a Schalta de Gula, because we didn't know where it's going to end up, Kastrama. And that's when the Nigun Nikava Chol Dvorkin sang and made somersaults. Kastrama was this distant city where they sent away the Frierdiker Rebbe for exile for 3 years. And then it was commuted to being totally free, Yud Beis Tammuz, 9 days later. And the Rebbe explains actually in this Chukasich of Memches, the connection to Eined Milvade, because Nikova, that's the essence of Yud Beis Tammuz. We need ourselves a revolution of this sort. And thank God in freedom, in Freiheit, where we have the comforts, where we should be able to feel the same compelling sense of urgency, that this is a war to bring Mashiach. The Rebbe says, Lost mizen seich felt Mashiach. What better words do you need for that? And this in essence is the whole battle. The Rebbe understood very well, like every Rebbe, Parnas Lefi Hadar, understood very well the challenges of this generation, the challenges of comforts, of prosperity, of easy life, relaxation, leisure, the list goes on. And to fill that with passion. On the contrary, we're blessed, so we don't have to focus our energies to fight an enemy outside there. We can focus our energies on the offense to bring Yiddishkeit, Torah, mitzvahs, and Chassidishkeit, and your Futzman to every corner of this earth. And that's what the Rebbe wanted. For each one of us, do we have that compelling sense of urgency? Answer that question to yourself and take it from there. That's Yud Beis Tammuz in a nutshell. Let's move from that. I think a transition would be exactly that. Summertime, according to the Rebbe, is challenges and opportunities. Of all times of the year, when is the most lax, most relaxed, is of course the summertime. People take off from work, hours are less intense. In general, the attitude, warmth, leads to all types of laxity, comforts, and so on. So here you see the Rebbe's approach to summer is exactly what I've just said. A battle against this type of attitude. Not, God forbid, not to take and be more relaxed, but use it with a compelling sense of urgency instead of for work, for Yiddishkeit. And you see this recurrent theme again and again and again. And I'll read a few letters and notes from the Rebbe on this topic. So let's first ask a few questions that people have asked, and then I'm going to discuss summer according to the Rebbe. So see this as a special summer episode, an addition as we enter the beginning of summer. Maybe Yud Beis Tammuz, Gimel Tammuz, all happens in this hemisphere, at least, in the beginning of the summer. Maybe a lesson in that. Of all times, when do you need a reminder, as you're about to enter the summer, of the need to go to war against apathy, the need for a Mesiras Nefesh, B'Poel. I mean Mesiras Ratzon B'Poel. Not, God forbid, than anything negative. When do we need that reminder most? In the beginning of the summer. So perhaps it's connected to that. So here's a few letters, and then I will respond to that in this context. What is the Rebbe's attitude to the closing of schools during these months, summer months? The Rebbe spoke strongly what yeshivas should not close in the summertime, yet all the schools and yeshivas do close. What is up with that? Question number 2. What is the Rebbe's position on bungalow colonies? Is it healthy and acceptable for spouses to be separated throughout the week? Okay, a few other questions of the same spirit. I don't have to read them all, but it's the same idea. Another question. Chassidus says that it's easier to serve God in the summer months. Just for the record, yes, that's in the Maimer. The first place I believe we find it is in the Maimer B'Yem Hashmini Atzeres Tofreish Lamed Beis. That would be in the year 1872. That's the Rebbe Marash. And the Maimer, the same Dibra Maskal B'Yem Hashmini Atzeres, the first one. At the end of that Maimer, Tofreish Ayin Zayin. That's from the Rebbe Rashab. And I believe that would be 1917. And there's, I believe, a Maimer Tofreish Peiches, if I'm correct, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, I don't recall which Maimer it is. If somebody knows exactly, where it says, it's easier to serve God in the summer months. So this is the person referring to. Chassidus says it's easier to serve God in the summer months. The question is, how do we reconcile that with the challenges and temptations due to the laxity and lightness of summertime? And then there's a question about the scandal and the prevalence of child abuse. How can I prepare myself and my children for summer camp, especially sleepaway? Well, it's a little off a tangent, but I'll try to address as much as I can. So let's begin with the general attitude of the Rebbe this summer. So it is absolutely correct that the Rebbe, in many letters and sichos, expressed his dismay, havhola, even shock, at yeshivas closing down, and the idea in general that life stops or closes down. Just to refer a few places, let's just refer some sources as we usually do. So I'm looking here in Chelik Yud Gimel Likutei Sichos. I'm sure these letters are printed in Igros Kodesh. It's just easier for me to find them here because I'm more familiar with it. Igros Kodesh came out later, but you can find it there. So there's a letter of 25th of Tammuz Tovshin Tezayin. That would be 1956. Yeah. Tammuz 1956. And the Rebbe says that Tachsisi Yitzhar Ameshuna. I'll just translate it. from the tools of the Yetzer Hara, from the methods, the wily methods, strange wily methods of the Yetzer Hara is a thing called Yemei Chefesh, free time, meaning vacation time. And this became sadly and tragically accepted even by Charedim, L'Dvar Hashem, that all year round is one approach, and then it comes to vacation time. It's not a time for work or effort, and they don't recognize, in a sense, that's Hepech HaTeirah, which is a person was created to toil. Lo Yegaita Matzosa Al Taimin, a person has to make effort. Every moment has to be used to the fullest. So the Rebbe came out with a campaign, and some of you may even be familiar with that, in Talks and Tales, which the Rebbe personally, of course, conceived of the idea, and then later was the editor. Every summer, in the summer editions, it always said, vacation, free yourself from bodily concerns so you can focus on spiritual concerns. So the Rebbe turned like everything around. Instead of just going to battle and say, let's eliminate vacation, the fact is that it's part of reality, it's part of the culture. Turn it into something positive by using the time on the contrary. Your time when you're resting from material work, great. So now you can give more time to your soul. And this became the essence of what summer camps were about, and any type of programs and activities in the summer. So that's one letter. If you go through, there's a section, Yemei HaKayitz, page 300, in Chelik Gimel Likutei Sichos, volume 13 of the Esophes, a few other letters. Another one, which I want to refer to, is a letter from 18th of Sivan, Tafshin Chav Beis, that would be 1962, where the Rebbe speaks about an interesting thing, again, Havhola, that schools close and so on in the summer. The Rebbe says to make an effort that teachers, mashpiyim, mentors, and people in Nanhola should stay in contact with their students throughout the summer, and all the benefits that come from that. A suggestion many people are probably not aware of. The Rebbe also speaks in some of these letters about the advantage of shlichus, merker shlichus, sending out students to go to different cities, and a time to spread Yiddishkeit, Chassidus, and so on, using that as well. Actually, a very sharp letter, the Rebbe, in a letter of 23rd of Tafshin Yud Gimel, that's right, the beginning of the Nasi is 1953. The Rebbe writes that someone asked that I hope the Rebbe doesn't have a kapeda, a grudge, that my son is not going on shlichus, and the Rebbe says, I'm not makbid on it. I have no grudge, but I have pain. Because these journeys, these trips, these shlichus and these missions, even though on the outside sounds like it's coming from Malach, Merkas L'Inyanei Chinuch, but amitis, it's a part of the plan of educating young people, and it helps them more than they help anybody to be trained to go out there in the field and help Jews. So it's more benefit for him. So it's not a kapeda. I'm saddened by the fact and pained by the fact that you don't appreciate the value for your son. So a very interesting letter. And finally, there's a sikha from Pinchas Tafshin Yud Zayin, Shabbos Parsha Pinchas Tafshin Yud Zayin, 1957, where the Rebbe speaks about the miles of Merker Shlichus. It's actually interesting. I never noticed it before. A point there where he speaks the advantage of actually going for a short period of time in the summer, for a month or whatever, a few weeks to different cities, because there's a certain novelty in that. And he says something which I think every shliach should take to heart. He says, and I say this not in Nezamusa, it's just an interesting thing that ever says that it has even a milah over somebody who lives in a place and is permanently there. Even though he can have more impact because he's permanently there, he says because someone is there, he says, let me see the exact language here. Someone who's there for a long period of time can forget the purpose of their coming to their place of shlichus, and now they think they're one of the citizens, one of the residents of this community. Or they say to themselves, they think to themselves, since I'm already there, a matter of time, and I already spread the mayonis, I already spread chassidus, this place is already no more chutzah. So I don't need to put any extra effort. Again, you see, the battle against complacency. That even though you may be on shlichus 1 year, 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, the sense of urgency has to be as powerful as the original moment. So the Rebbe takes the whole concept of summer, of vacation, of comforts, and turns it on its head and says, fine, give comfort to the body, relax in material wares, but the passion, the commitment, the devotion to the spiritual should be even more powerful now that you have freed some of your time and some of your energy because of the summer months. That's one. I should also refer you to another sikha, since we're already loading up. This is called summer reading. Yes, summer reading. So there's a very interesting sikha, Tovshin Mem Zayin, where the Rebbe refers to as Pinchas Tovshin Mem Zayin. This is in Sefer HaSichos Tovshin Mem Zayin, volume 2, page 485. So he says, we have a special lesson for the Jewish children, especially connected to the summertime. The Rebbe says, in the last years, is Leide Gevorim became a modern minig, a strange custom in many countries, including America. And Sumatzat vermacht min yeshivas. Here he talks about closing yeshivas, yeshivas ktanas, chedorim, and so on. And he allowed Jewish children to charum drein in the gassen, to hang out in the streets, without any direction. And he goes on to speak about New York and other places where you see what's going on, such as Afkeda is going on. She says, Yeder Eid was zed the matzav achiv gomor. Everyone who sees the situation has a personal responsibility, a complete responsibility. When a givaldik achrai is underlined, an unbelievable responsibility, an obligation to do whatever is possible for this pidyon shvuim. The Rebbe compares it to freeing hostages, by either trying to influence parents to send children to a camp, to a summer camp that's founded on a saturated with Torah mitzvahs and Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, or if the child stays home, make sure the kinzel machen sein Zimmer, a child should be involved in doing something, projects that turn their home, that turn their environment, their room, into something that's connected to Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe goes on further and says, if somebody thinks that it's just an accident, zufällig, that they happen to see such a child, the Rebbe says, Zog de Baal Shem Tov as Heipzich Nitan. It's impossible to say such a thing. How do you translate that? That it's completely inconceivable, such a thing, because anything you see is a lesson to you. So I refer you all to read that sikha, the end of Pinchas Tovshin Mem Zayin, 485-46, page 45-46, among many other things from the Rebbe. Now, as far as answering some of the questions, which I shall do now, let's start with the Rebbe, the answer to the question that Chassidus says it's easier to serve God in the summer. The Chassidus explains the reason is because Shemesh U'Magen Hashem Elokim, the sun and its shield refers to Elikus. So when the sun shines more, it's considered a time where there's more divine revelation. The cold winter months are considered a time of weaker revelation, which is why we see that the Yom Tovim are all around the summer months. Pesach begins the spring, and Sukkot is the end of fall. So it's all in the summer months, and then comes the long winter months between Sukkot and Pesach, as the Maimorim of Chassidus bring from Medrash, where the king sends away his daughter from the kingdom and empowers her with her journey and her mission. Because coldness is always seen as a time when there's more darkness, Gashmis, and Beruchnis, it reflects on a weaker spiritual revelatory stage. So in truth, the summer is warmth. The summer is so-called comfort. The summer is warmth and light, shorter nights, longer days, and so on until Tu B'Av, when that starts changing, is a reflection of more divine revelation. But like it is with everything in life, when you have more divine revelation, you also have more challenges. When you're in the cold winter months, yes, there's more intensity and less laxity. So it's not a contradiction at all. As a matter of fact, it speaks in Sfarim why we learn Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos, and the custom continues throughout the summer months until the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, is because in the summer there's a tendency to be gibzach more. There's more taivas, there's more temptations. So the fact that there's more oir, more gili, is not a contradiction. On the contrary, when things are more bright, when there's sunnier days, warmer days, so if you use it properly, it's a good bracha, milmaila, that's a time to use it for the ruchnisdika things, for spiritual growth. But it also has, like anything, kol hagadol mechaveri yitzrei gadol mimenu. The greater the person, the greater the challenges. The greater the revelation, the greater the challenge. So it's not a contradiction. It's all up to how we use it. And that's in general a rule in Yiddishkeit. So like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya and Tereir, that when a person is more shcheda, is depressed, the personality, it's an opportunity to become more involved in learning Torah, because learning more scholarly activity is more fitting to somebody who's more of a loner. which like is why the reason why after Tu B'Av, when the nights start getting longer, the night is created for learning because it's more conducive. Whereas day, you're involved with other people and more social. So which one is a higher revelation? Of course, warmth is higher and the light is higher, but it comes with a whole packle of challenges. And that's what we have to understand, that even though come summer, our attitude should be, yes, be more comfortable, be more relaxed in material things, but be more vigilant in spiritual matters. So regarding the other questions that were asked, well, about bungalow colonies, the Rebbe many times in his social satire, quote unquote, would make fun of people leaving the city, their comforts in the city, to go in the Eisreisen and mutschen sich in a bungalow colony. Today, obviously, things are a lot different. People have much more comfortable homes there, and so on. But the Rebbe did express himself a number of times pretty harshly about people just going off. I don't think the Rebbe would be very positive about the idea, even though I've not seen it directly, but the idea of husbands and wives being apart that long. And yes, it is a problem. To go ahead and say we should eliminate the whole vacation time and bungalow colonies, the Rebbe never, when the Rebbe was asked, though he criticized and said some strong things about going off to the bungalow colony, he once actually said something which I don't know if I should even repeat, but a very harsh statement about it. But regardless, afterwards, when he was asked, should it be stopped, he said no. Better use it out for a positive thing. But that we have to be much more vigilant and much more wary, absolutely. Because there are many more nisyanis, as I said, and many more challenges. What to do about the idea of couples? Look, people have to go to work, so it's very difficult to control and say people should stay in the colonies all week long. Whether families, have children, that's one of the reasons you go. So the point of the matter is, whenever there's more challenges, you have to be more, as I said, vigilant, much more intensely focused on positive things, and make sure you have a good mashpiyim where a person can really help prevent any type of mechshelim and any tests and the temptations that are presented. So the bottom line, the final analysis, even though the Rebbe had his so-called critique of the summer and its attitudes and bungalow colonies and that whole approach, but the Rebbe chose to take the approach, which is the Chassidish and the Rebbe's approach in all things, is to turn it into something positive. That in bungalow colonies there should be shiurim, there should be even more focus on learning, and the comfort should be relegated only into the material, and use every opportunity to use these so-called freer times to be mefitz and to spread Yiddishkeit even more. We are in shlichus wherever you are, in the summer as well. And on the contrary, when there's Shemesh Shemagan Hashem Elokim, there's more revelation, there's more power to influence people. I've seen in some Chassidish bungalow colonies, they go out to other bungalow colonies, they go to other people, the communities that they're around, to spread Torah and Yiddishkeit. We're on shlichus wherever we are. And if you take that attitude and you show it to your children, and the husbands and wives are all participant in being not just, we're relaxing, which is always a situation that becomes a breeding ground for problems, where you feel that you're on the mission, and in many ways even more compelling dimension of it, that is the best way to solve and address most of these issues. And that was the approach. But at the same time, we have to also be aware of the challenges and react accordingly. Let's move on to another subject. As far as the children that you mentioned, let me just say this. Look, I don't think it's unique to camps. I think camps are getting better and better at protecting children, of making sure that no adults are ever with children alone, and there's no situations. Obviously, you can't be perfect, but the fact of the matter is, I think there's a lot more vigilance, and as parents, you have to demand it. Bottom line is, you have to talk to the faculties of the camps. What are they doing to prevent any, God forbid, inappropriate behavior? And not just prevent and wait till something happens, God forbid, but preventive. The way they talk to the counselors, the way they talk to the learning teachers, the way they talk to the adults that under their care for 2 months or whatever amount of time the children are there. So something that every parent must bring it up and address it. That's the way you address these things. You can't ignore it and make believe someone else is going to, and rely that someone may take care of it. That's the best way to address it. And one thing I want to say, going back to the theme of Yud-Beis Tammuz and Balak, is the discussion, the connection to Balak Taka. This week's parsha is Balak. So we all know Balak is the story of Bilam being commissioned by Balak of Moav to curse the Jews. Long story short, he cannot curse the Jews because he's a prophet. And he can only say what God puts in his mouth. So as much as he hated that, He had no choice. As 3 times that Balak asked him to curse, it ended up becoming the greatest blessings. From Matevu Alecha Yaakov all the way to the great blessings of Mashiach, of Derech Keichem Yaakov, etc. The greatest blessings, Dafka from Bilam. Chassidus talks about Vayafich Haklol La Brocha, how you transform from the darkest becomes the greatest. But then, in the curtain call, in his final act, Bilam tells Balak, let me tell you something. You cannot destroy these people. They are God's people. God doesn't want you to touch them. You can't curse them. But they can destroy themselves. Send the women, the Moabite women, the Midianite women, and let them seduce the Jews. And then they will destroy themselves. And that's exactly what happens at the end of the Pasha. It's a tremendous lesson, and especially in our free times. We've seen in history, Yud-Beis Tammuz is the best declaration of it, as well as so many other, that God protected Jews ultimately, and we made it, we're here. But now the greatest challenge in history for Jews has been freedom. More assimilation, more challenges today than we've ever had. But not challenges someone wants to shoot us or arrest us or convert us or baptize us. Today the challenge, as I said earlier, is the apathy, the comfort. And exactly as Bilam said, you can't do it to them in cursing them. You're not going to get God to cooperate. But if they weaken themselves, and what better lesson when we're entering the summer months, especially the Nisayan that Bilam sent on through Balak, the advice. The Nisayan, our freedoms, our comforts, the summer months are a time to bring more elokus into this world. That's the challenge. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. And the connection to Beis Tammuz, again, the lessons that we discussed earlier are obvious. Next, Ayin Beis. Question, Ayin Beis psychology class. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I studied Ayin Beis a little and I listened to this lecture from Professor Bloom. If any one of you want the link, we'll put it up in the My Life landing page. I'd be very interested to hear you discuss the body and soul combination and what controls our emotions through thought and deed. I'm asking because I want to apply it in my daily life. Thanks for your time, respectfully. Well, I teach Ayin Beis every morning, and we post actually the classes on YouTube. I listened to the lecture. I just want to say one thing, and then I'll elaborate more in future episodes. There are tremendous parallels between Chassidus and Lahavdil psychology and other schools of thought. And when I say parallels, I mean simply put, because Chassidus is emes and understanding the psyche and the inner workings, so it's not surprising that you're going to find these ideas in different schools of thought. This Professor Bloom identified similarities of that nature. And it does come down to ultimately, yes, that there is a body-soul connection. Obviously, the essence of everything is body and soul. And above all, how we control that the soul dominates in our bodily lives, in our material lives, is, of course, the Alter Rebbe explains that there's the Mayach Shalit Al Alev, the cognitive discipline, cognitive conditioning that can regulate emotional conditioning. And that essentially is the parallel that he talks about in this paper, but most importantly in Ayin Beis, there's an entire section where he discusses how the mind develops from childhood through adulthood, the 3 stages of Ibur, Yonika, Meichin, where first the mind is just a resource that a child uses just to get their emotions satisfied. Then there comes a point where the mind starts becoming an independent voice, until the point where there's Meichin de Gadlus, where a mind becomes a dominant force and could control emotional reactions and definitely behavior. Those 3 stages are the key thing to really develop and discuss the parallels between what psychology knows today and what Chassidus can teach. I've said many times, and from the outset of my life, this would be a tremendous undertaking. Anyone interested, I'd be happy to collaborate in some way of finding not just the parallels, but creating a holistic Chassidic approach to psychology and to life, because everything is there in Chassidus. What we can perhaps learn from the existing methodologies is a language and an applications that can be applied in real life situations. But the concepts of control of mind over matter, of soul over body, is definitely not just a concept in Tanya, but in Ayin Beis and many other places, develops it into a full-bodied methodology and system. Then finally, before we go to the essays, the question about reward and punishment. What is the meaning and the distorted misconceptions surrounding reward and punishment? Question 1. I have a difficult time understanding the concept of reward and punishment according to Judaism. Is Hashem like a principal or parent, meting out punishments whenever we mess up? It sounds to me like the incentive and the stick, the carrot and the stick, which I understood to be a very elementary way of performing our service of God. Essentially, is God some type of teacher and disciplinarian, and rewards us, sends us a candy if we do well, sends us a punishment if we do not well. Can you please explain this? According to Chassidus. Question 2. I committed a pretty serious sin. I'm not going to get into the details. However, based on what I've learned about reward and punishment, I'm going to receive a punishment of equal measure sometime. Is there any way to know when or once we've been punished for a particular act? Can punishments come back to us years or lifetimes later? The whole concept has me very paranoid, as if I am walking through life with a list of good or bad karma I am accumulating. Do you have any advice to fix my unhealthy mindset and approach to reward and punishment? I know I must have internalized this idea wrong, because it can't be normal to be keeping tabs on punishments coming to me. Okay, good questions. And I just want to say, in the future, that we will be dealing from time to time when questions come in on actual themes like reward and punishment and other themes that come our way from Chassidus, and bring it down also as a part of applied Chassidus to our personal lives. So this is a great question. Reward and punishment is one of those stereotypes that absolutely, where do we learn the first about reward and punishment? At home and at school. So as soon as you start learning Torah, you hear, you know, and the opposite, you immediately say, okay, same thing with God. Just like my parents, or just like my school, and just like others, they reward me when I do something good, and they punish me. And that, of course, creates this childish, juvenile image of reward and punishment, which, of course, begs the questions, as you asking here, what does this mean? Why is God, we're not talking about a teacher, God, an immortal creator, interested in punishing his creatures for not being perfect? He created them not perfect. He knows that they're challenged. What is this thing called schar and einish? And as usual, when you go back to the source, especially in Chassidus, you find a completely refreshing and new way of looking at it. So you have to almost clean your slate. I'm not going to say almost, completely clean the slate and get rid of preconceived notions. The Rash Shalah, brought in Chassidus, the Shalah HaKadosh writes in the beginning of his Sefer. He talks about two opinions among Torah scholars in what is schar and einish. Is it zguli, he calls it, or is it tivi? Is reward and punishment a zgula, which means unrelated? You do a mitzvah, you put on tefillin, you keep Shabbos, so God gives you a reward unrelated to the actual deed that you did. That's zguli. Or is it siba mesuba, of cause and effect, as in TV, a natural thing? Like when you do a healthy thing, you get a healthy result. You eat something healthy, you become a healthier person. And the conclusion, even though there are different places in Torah that mashma one or the other, the conclusion, especially in Chassidus, is that it's teva. Sibu mesubov, cause and effect. When someone puts their hand in fire, would you say that the fire is punishing your hand and burning it and causing you to hurt? No. You'd say the nature of the world is such. The laws of nature that God created is that when you put your hand in fire, fire burns. Stay away from that. On the other hand, fire can be used in other ways that are healthy ways. When you eat a healthy food, would you say your body rewards you for eating healthy food, some type of detached reward? No, it's cause and effect. Action, reaction. When, God forbid, someone ingests something that is toxic or unhealthy, cause and effect again. So really, schar and einish, as opposed to a teacher and a student and a parent and so on, their reward and punishment, I remember when we were in school, ridiculous punishments, write 1,000 times, I'm going to be a good boy. It's just a way of making you know that you have to or walk or stand for the next 2 hours. Or do some other activity, just to show you that what you did was wrong, and here you'll remember the lesson because you're given something very bitter, something unpleasant to do. In Torah, it's all calculated. This is not about from meting out some punishment or reward. It's cause and effect. And Beloshen of the Mishnah, schar mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that's why the Mashiach is Toli Maseinu V'Avodaseinu in the beginning of chapter 37. that when we do a mitzvah, we're releasing a little Mashiach in this world. We're releasing a little godliness. And when they all accumulate, you have the world changes. It's not an accident. It's not like you do mitzvahs, I'll send you Mashiach. Mashiach is Mola Ores Deis Hashem Kamayim Leyam Achasim, a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea, in the language of the Rambam, and the language of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Perek Lamed Zayin, Gili Erein Sov Be'elam Hazeh Gashmi, divine revelation in this material world. How do you do that? By bringing divine revelation, as much as we're able to. So our activities and our actions are direct cause and effect. The Rebbe has in Chelik Chofhei, in Sicha Vayigash, a fascinating piece that the Rebbe actually added in his own handwriting. He asked the question there's a famous machlekes in Gemara. Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol? What's greater? To learn or to do? So Rabbi Akiva, the halacha is at the end of the day each one has a quality, but Talmud is Gadol because Talmud Gadol shemevi l'idei Maisa. Talmud is greater because it has both the learning and it brings you to Maisa. But then there's a famous Medrash Shmuel brings that there's that l'osed lo Mashiach comes, the halacha will change. Maisa Gadol. Maisa will be greater than Talmud. Tremendous question. But there's a milsa b'taim. The Gemara says a reason, because it's b'chlal masayim on it. Talmud has both, studying and doing. So how could it come a time where doing will be more important than studying? Studying has both. So there's the answer was in the Sikha there, Chelik Chofei Vayigash. Vayigash is Yehuda and Yosef is Talmud and Maisa. Or Yosef is Talmud, Yehuda is Maisa, Hidah. Yosef is Torah. And the Rebbe added B'Ksaviyat Kochi in his handwriting an additional answer, which is so simple but so profound. The Rebbe says, why do you need to learn Torah? Because on our own we don't know what's right and what's wrong. When you need to eat, you don't need to open up a book and say, my body is hungry. Your body tells you it's hungry. When you're tired, your body tells you it's tired. But in this Elam Hazah, the way it was created by God with its Tzimtzum Arishan and Helam, God concealed His presence and what's right for us. If you don't look in Shulchan Aruch, you won't know what path to take. Do I do this? Do I do that? Is this the path of life? Is the path of opposite of life? Comes the Torah and illuminates. Torah is Torah Er Hira B'Chaim. I'm elaborating a bit, but the Rebbe Kitzur, that's what Torah does. Talmud. La'osed Lavi, the world will become one with the divine, meaning there won't be any more this concealment, like the Rebbe brings from a Medrash. When it comes Shemitah, you don't need to look in Shulchan Aruch or in Torah. The fruit on the tree will say, do not touch me, it's Shemitah. Or Shabbos, the different Gersoyos on this. Even Mekir Tizak, the stone in the wall will cry out. In other words, the world, the Yoda Kol Pol Ki'ata Pa'alta. Every part of the world, every part of the world will be saturated with the divine. You don't need to go look in a sefer. Today you need to look because you don't know that today is Shabbos or Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah or another day, or that this is what you should be doing. But once the world itself is, then it will be just as natural as a person hunger and thirst. He even brings there the din. He brings about a behemoth sheta, that if you are a shemer, you protect an animal. And the animal, you have to protect. Shemer chinam has certain responsibilities. They're lenient responsibilities. What happens if the animal jumps into fire and gets killed or hurt? Are you responsible? The answer is no, because you didn't know. A normal behemoth will never jump into fire. You had to protect it from normal things it may do, hurting or damaging others' property. But unless you were told, how would you know? But animal, no one's going to jump into fire. That's why the only reason we do a sin is because we don't know we're putting our hand in fire. That's why you have a Torah. So since there'll be such a world, that's why Maisa Gadol. And what about learning Torah? So the Alter Rebbe says in the Geras HaKedesh, Simcha Vav, he says that then Torah will be liyachid yichudim elyenim, for higher purposes, to connect deeper to God, to maybe miyachid, to create higher unifications. So schar neinish is really simply cause and effect. The schar you get is the result of your activity that reveals the health of it. And einish is not so on punishment. It is a result of what you did. It's a whole different take on Gehenim, on heaven, on Gan Eden, and on schar neinish. More to say, and I'm sure if there's follow-up questions, I will elaborate further. Let me go to the essays due to a shortness of time. I'll try to be as quick as possible. My life essays. So again, we choose 3 essays. One in Yiddish, This is the first in Yiddish and two in English. The first one in Yiddish is called True Self-Development by David Lichtenstatter, age 27. Job is Integrity Care Services, an administrator of Integrity Care Services, Brooklyn, New York. He writes in Yiddish, he begins with Likutei Diburim, L'shanis Teva Midesov, that the role of Chassidus is, as the Rebbe brings in Kuntis and Yon Shater Chassidus, to change our midas. And he demonstrates this with a very interesting story with a man called Rab Zundel, how he was taught the message from Tanya Perek Tezvav, that sometimes a person can be coming to Minyan and doing everything right, but they're not quite on the same level as another person who may rush and come late to the Minyan, because one is doing what is comfortable to do, and the other is Mishana Teva Midesa, Mishana Hadagilis, changes his comfort zone. So this essay, is rated pretty high essay. It didn't fulfill all the requirements of the guidelines of the contest, but definitely worthwhile reading. Posted on meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. An application of the idea of Meshanas Teva Midesov, based on the Tanya Perek Tezvav, through a very fascinating story. But I did find something interesting at the end of it. He quotes a sikha from Yud Beis Tammuz Tov Lamed Zayin. And I'll just read it because it was in the Gay at Yud Beis Tammuz. Men soll ufer machen allerlei Nisyenes auf Gufi Yisrael und auf Neshamas Yisrael und auf Am Yisrael und Teres Eretz Yisrael. Was damals sein ein gesunter Volk und ein gesunter Land. The Rebbe talks again about the tests that are happening these days on Gufi Yisrael, the bodies of Jews, the souls of Jews, Eretz Yisrael, and so on. So I just thought that interesting Yud Beis Tammuz connection. So that's essay number 1 that we will review. Essay number 2 is written by, it's called The Potency of Thought, based on Machshava Mayeles, which is the Frierdiker Rebbe's opening sikh of Likutei Diburim, Volume 1, right in the beginning, by Batya Levitan, age 51, Advanced Diagnostics Pain Treatment Center, a nurse practitioner in New Haven, Connecticut. Fascinating to see the diversity of the people who submitted essays. And begins by writing, Batya begins, learning Chassidus can be very intimidating. One could view Chassidus as a foreign language, a foreign way of thinking. What does Chassidus have to do with my everyday struggles? And she basically comes away and saying, absolutely not. This is a false narrative. Hashem did not provide us with the Torah in order for us to be monks in a citadel somewhere in the desert. It's all a guide map for us who are mired who's steeped in the physical mire of this world, how to incorporate it in our lives. This roadmap is Chassidus, and Chabad Chassidus in particular. And she goes on into a long discussion about using thinking, Machshava Mayeles, how thought changes things. Brings the story the Frierdiker Rebbe brings down Likutei Diburim, and talks Barichas. She uses quotes from Tanya about Machshava Dibra Maisa, but especially the power of Machshava, the incredible potent power of thinking, as she puts it. And I suggest a stepwise approach in tackling a problem by using thought to first frame our problem. We then create within our minds scenarios where we can see ourselves conquering our fears, tackling our everyday challenges. And she gives an example in her own life about a student she sent off to yeshiva, and how, and the same thing with the medical and health care system. And then it concludes with a step-by-step plan. Thinking is potent to counter any everyday problem. Steps are: distill out the problem into the simplest fragments. Meditate for 10 minutes how you will look and feel when you have conquered your obstacle. Actually picture in your mind images of crossing a goal line, paying a bill, getting a job. What are you wearing? What does your skin feel like? 3, then distill out the practical way to reach your goal with very small concrete steps. For example, I will go to the gym for a half hour 3 times a week. What are you wearing at the gym? What does the sweat feel like on your neck? In other words, use Machshava to its fullest, not just in a general sense, but to go to actually visualize, and that visualization affects you. And she applies this to the health field, how that the healthcare providers should not just prescribe medication, but also dictate the function of an organ, but provide dictate the function of an organ, but provide a prescription for thought. Each patient should be given specific meditations where he actually envisions himself well and functional. In conclusion, she writes, we have the ability to create our own destinies with the direct supervision of Hashem, and the powerful tool of thinking is potent. and goes on to explain a little more about Chassidus, how Chassidus helps us do this. A very powerful essay, worthwhile reading, and that is also at meaningfullife.com/my-life/contest. And finally, the third one, Changing Perceptions with Experiential Knowledge by Zev Bannett, age 33, Machon Mayon, and Kerem Yavne, a teacher. Okay, Zev writes, how can I create meaningful change in my life and become the person I always wished I could be? We all have aspects of ourselves we don't like, that we wish we could improve, or at least improve, enabling us to become better. How do we accomplish this? Are we destined to simply keep trying? So the goal of this essay, he writes, is to convey an effective and powerfully catalytic method for personal growth, change, and success based on the teachings of Jewish thought found in Chassidus. Sometimes when thinking of Jewish thought or Chassidus, we think of religion and God. I hope to illustrate that Chassidus teachings, and indeed all Torah thought, when understood deeply, are fundamentally universal reality-based truths through which we operate and interact with each other and our world. And goes on to explain and take this idea of what he calls experiential wisdom, or experiential knowledge, I should say, as opposed to empirical knowledge. And that experiential knowledge that he calls das is the key to being able to make real change. And he gives an example. He gives an example of an engineer climbing on a mountain, trying to solve a problem, but until it becomes an experiential solution, instead of a theoretical, he cannot solve the problem. Goes on to discuss Chochmah Bina Das, and I want to get your comments on this actually. He gives like a certain take on Chochmah Bina Das that I've not seen quite phrased this way, and I'm thinking about it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. He says the difference between Chochmah Bina Das is Chochmah is abstract fundamental thought, Bina is extrapolated developed thought, and Das is experiential knowledge. Meaning Chochmah is not usually just the spark of an idea, but more an abstract buried thought. And Das ultimately is the aha moment. I wanted to know what you think. Is this an accurate translation and definition of Chochmah Bina Das? Chochmah means thoughts or ideas that are so abstract that they are undeveloped. They exist in our minds in potential, but they are somewhat dormant. They can be uncovered through Bina and sometimes translated as understanding, wherein we ponder the abstract and extrapolate its implications in the real world. And when you take it and you extrapolate, you reach an aha moment, that's a Das moment. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Anyway, he goes on to say how Chochmah Bina Das, and especially Das, the key of experiential, that allows you to really change reality. Like he gives an example of a speaker who's beginning to speak, but there are two people right in the front row who are speaking while he's speaking. Of course, he gets very disturbed until he comes to discover experiential knowledge, not what he thinks, that they're actually, one of them is translating his words to the other, which changes his whole attitude. Explaining how experiential knowledge, as opposed to abstract or theoretical, actually can change reality, can change your life. Another example of someone who always comes late, and they don't know how to change it, as bad as it is, until they realize why they fundamentally do that, why they minimize it. So until you don't have an experiential take on something, essentially you cannot really change your behavior. So this essay is the third essay we're addressing, and with that we conclude this week's My Life episode 73, Chassidus Applied. If you want to present your questions, please send them to meaningfullife.com/mylife. There's a forum, an anonymous forum. If you want to write to me directly, please do so at simon@meaningfullife.com. As always, it's been an honor. Again, good Yontif on this 88th anniversary of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz. The Geula lives on. The revolution lives on. It's in our hands now, whether we will look at, and we definitely will look at, the freedoms we're given to have the same Mesiras Nefesh, Mesiras Ratzon, and dedication that the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Chassidim of then had in transforming this world. And Taka show what the Rebbe says in that Yechidus, yes, give us Freiheit, we gave us freedom, and we show, yes, we need and want Mashiach, and we'll do whatever it takes to bring Mashiach through spreading the well springs, through the summer months, and wherever we may be, Hashem Tzadikova Kinanu, wherever you go, God leads you there for a reason. Your reason is not just to take care of yourself or others, it's to spread, it's to influence, it's to transform. And with your chutza, we're promised, which will make it worth all the efforts and the prices paid by the Frierdiker Rebbe, by the Rabbeim, all the challenges. Everyone should have a gezunte zumer, a good yontif. And until next week, this has been Simon Jacobson, My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 73. Next week, 8 to 9 p.m., we'll continue this series.